Hi everyone. We've had the first round of the F2 and F3 series, giving us our first real glimpse of how the grids stack up. In this video we'll be looking at results across the on-track sessions and go over any incidents and notable performances. We'll start with F3. Anyone only interested in F2 can skip using the timestamps, but you should watch F3, it's excellent. Unfortunately, Ernesto Rivera is still out of action following a spine injury he sustained in January during the last round of CT Frot. This means we already have a change to the drivers' lineup. In the seat with Campos for this round is Patrick Hoytzenroder, who also ran the car during pre-season testing in February. This does look to be having an impact on Campos' standings in the team's championship. Alright, let's get into the on-track sessions, starting with F3 practice. There were a few wide runs off the track, but fortunately no crashes. The most notable occurrence was an engine failure for Mattia Kolnagi, involving some impressive bouts of flame. This did bring out a red flag. For support series practice sessions, the clock continues to count down during a red flag, and there was no more on-track running for the final 5 minutes. Next up is our first competitive session of the season, F3 qualifying. We managed to get to the 20-minute mark before the red flags came out. Matteo De Paolo had thrown it too hard through turns 9 and 10, skated over the gravel, and hit the barrier. Once everyone else got back going, Ugochukwu, who had dominated the timing table all session, slammed into a signboard on the side of the track, munching his front wing in the process. Stromstedt takes a trip over a curb and just about launches himself into the air, but finally Niall nabs the top spot on the podium on his final run. Our full top 12 are Niall in first, Ugochukwu, Slater, Guadish, Lacorte, Kolnagi, Kato, Wharton, Badaware, Stromstedt, Dillany, and Dalpino down in 12. Very pleasantly surprised to see Lacorte and Badaware hauling in some competitive times, but note that the top 12 order gets flipped for our next competitive session, the sprint race. This was a bit of a wild one. James Wharton went off track at lap 1 turn 1, causing him to drop down the order. He did manage to claw back some of the lost ground, but his teammate Louis Sharp had the opposite start and climbed 5 places. Mattia Kolnagi took a trip off the track, dropping him down to the back of the pack. Our drivers who didn't make the most out of quali seemed to struggle at the back of the pack. There wasn't much in the way of moves from Giusti and De Paolo. On lap 8, Sharp had started to make some moves against teammate Wharton. The two had some wheel-to-wheel racing where Wharton managed to push Sharp off track. Sharp rejoined, but there wasn't enough space for the two of them to take their chosen lines through the corner. Both took a hard smack into the barrier, destroying both cars and bringing out a red flag, which eventually resulted in the race being called off. With the limited racing laps run, only 5 of the top finishers collected points for the sprint race. 5 for Dalpino, counting down to 1 for Kato. This was such a bad start for Prema, and it wasn't about to get any better in the feature race. Following their incident, Sharp and Wharton were both handed medical stand-downs for the rest of the weekend. Rolling off the grid with 2 DNSs, Slater gets ahead of Ugochukwu on the start, but Niall maintains his position. Kolnagi and Stromstedt battle, but Taito Kato takes the opportunity to pass both of them. Garfias has an immediate problem requiring a pit stop, firmly locking in the bad weekend for Prema. By lap 2 with DRS active, Ugochukwu passes Slater to take position 2 back and starts to close the gap Niall had built. By lap 4, Ugochukwu passes Niall for the lead, and Badaware passes Lacorte for 5th. Honestly, both of them well surpassing my expectations going into the season. Stromstedt has the first of 2 spicy passes this race, sliding past Dalpino. At the rear of the field, De Paolo is getting tangled in messes. This really is a weekend to forget for him. With the MPs, Giusti is making midfield passes, but sadly Tappanen is dropping. I certainly did not expect the rookie on the team to be the immediate standout. I'm hoping it was just a bad quali for Giusti and Tappanen, and that they'll be back at full force soon. By lap 9, Badaware did a full 360, but the safety car gets called for Biromakti sliding into a barrier. We're back to racing by lap 12. On lap 13, Lacorte takes 4th place from Guadish, and Badaware ends up wide in a gravel trap, losing places. Still on the same mad run a lap later, Lacorte makes a pass on Slater, which, if you had travelled back in time and told me about as recently as 3 days earlier, I would have thought was some sick joke. Honestly, I'm really happy to see signs of Dams and Lacorte making improvements since the close of the 2025 season. I want everyone to be performing at their best and putting on a show, and that's certainly what was delivered. Shortly afterward, a 5-second penalty is declared for Niall for moving before the signal. Honestly, heartbreaking. I so wanted him to have a good win and take some of the talk about the season dominance away from just Slater and Ugochukwu. Having fallen back a place, Slater then had to defend against Guadish. Stromstedt capitalizes on the rookie making the attack and takes the place from Guadish, who then also gets passed by teammate Kato. Spicy pass number 2 for Stromstedt occurs as he then fights for 3rd place, pushing Lacorte off track and clipping his front wing. Lecorte drops to 7th. Stromstead collects a 10-second penalty for this one later. Insult to injury, Lecorte also nets himself a 5-second penalty for a start infringement. By lap 20, we get another safety car. DePaulo had finally been making progress but ends up spinning with Bartaware. They both save it and make it back onto the track after a brief yellow flag, but Michael Shin, who took evasive action around the pair rejoining the track, skids into the wall. Checking on some big AIX moves further down the field, Benavides had been quietly collecting places and had made it into 7th place, 13 up from where he started at 20th, and Barrichello had made it up 12 places into 18th. We end the race under a safety car, which, worst case scenario for all those with time penalties, having the pack bunched up all the way to the line. This pushes Niall, Stromstead and Lecorte all out of the points. Lecorte also nets a post-race penalty for a start procedure infringement, locking him at the bottom of the race finishes. Hopefully his qualifying and passing in this race wasn't a one-off performance, and we'll all have an opportunity to eat our words later in the season. All in all, this was a great race and well-deserved to our podium finishes of Taito Kato in 3rd, Freddie Slater in 2nd, and Ugo Ugochukwu in 1st. While we didn't get a full race worth of action for the sprint, we had some drivers pulling impressive numbers of passes through the field for the feature race. The live streams tend to keep the focus on the front of the pack. Most of these took place further back, but I think it's important to bring attention to some impressive performances that may otherwise go unnoticed. Topping the charts of most passes in round 1 is Clero and Benavides tied for 14 passes each. Not far behind is Barrichello on 13, then Yamakoshi on 11 and David on 8. We'll keep track of these passes throughout the season. Wrapping up round 1, our current top 3 for the title are Ugochukwu in 1st, Slater 2nd and Delpino 3rd. There will be some noticeable performance increases as the season goes on, particularly from the rookies or those who have moved teams. They'll also settle more easily into the more familiar European tracks, so if you're not impressed by some of the newer drivers you were expecting to do well, give them a few rounds to lock in. That's it for F3, next up is F2. Practice was a bit more eventful than I'd expected, but was probably an opportunity for them to shake off some of the rust. Mini took some very minor damage from losing a front wing end plate after contact with Bennett. Villagomez narrowly hauls his car out of the gravel and avoids a nasty collision with the barrier. Colton Herta appeared to be having some teething issues adapting to the new car, tyres and driving style. He lost the car and took a big hit, bringing out a red flag. With both F2 and F3, there's no extra time allocated for practice sessions, so the clock continued to count down during the car retrieval. A crash for Intrapuvizak caused another red. As the drivers pull into the pit lane, Mini's engine seemed to expire, and he slowed to a stop just before arriving at the pits and didn't make it back on track afterwards. His bad engine luck seems to have followed him to a different team this season. We'll get into this as we move into qualifying. There was a red flag with 20 minutes to go for Muddy Boyer skidding over the gravel and slamming into the wall on the exit of turn 12. A disappointing start to the season for the Aston Martin Jr. Mini's engine issues from practice reared their head again. MP were using the red flag time in the pit lane to investigate his engine, which proved to be disastrous. As after the green flag was out, he came to a stop with a little over 9 minutes to go, bringing out another red flag. Now that we've had a definite technical retirement, we get to start the season's tally. We'll get to that after going over all the on-track sessions for the race weekend. Sadly, at this point, we'd used all the excess time allocation for the qualifying session, and the clock continued to count down throughout the red flag. At this point, Leon and Dunn's fastest lap set them outside the reverse grid order, so being able to get back on the circuit and set a good time was crucial. The cars were back on track with 3 minutes to go, giving enough time for one prep lap to get the tyres in the right temperature window, and one push lap to set a representative time. With such time constraints, the teams aren't able to space their pit exits out, so all the cars end up jostling for position in a big pack, trying to get a toe off of each other. Villagomez was getting a little spicy with a pass on both AIX drivers in an attempt to get a better track position. Montoya slid his car a little, and unfortunately did not set himself a good time on the more evolved track at this point in the session. Bogdanovic locked in a great pole lap, nabbing the fastest time in sectors 1 and 3. Herta claimed the top time for Sector 2, but it wasn't enough to get him in the reverse grid order. Mini and Boyer's fastest times were deleted due to being the cause of the red flags. Our top 10 were Bogdanovic, Stenchon, Dunn, Leon, Solov, Kamara, Miney, Goethe, Dirksen, and Intrapuvizak. For the sprint race, they'll be in reverse order with Intrapuvizak at the front of the pack. Launching straight into the sprint race, the first few laps of this were so hard to keep track of with the top 8 trading places constantly. Dirksen didn't take long before he made his move by turn 9 on lap 1 to pass Goethe for second. Shortly afterwards, Goethe overcooked it and spun, but saved himself and rejoined at the rear of the field. Varone does the same further down the track. In the same spot at turn 9 the next lap, Dirksen passed Intrapuvizak for the lead. Further down the road, his teammate Kamara made a nice double pass on Solov and Miney, but Miney reclaimed the ground. Just behind, Leon makes the most of his situation and snuck past Solov, sending him to the clutches of Stenchon. At this point, Bogdanovic ended up in the pits, rejoining at the back of the pack. By lap 3, Solov made a claim of turn 1 and forced Stenchon to find another line off track. Stenchon straight lines it off the track and ends up in front of Solov, never giving the position back, earning himself a 5-second penalty later on. On lap 6, Miney falls behind Stenchon and Dunn impressively making his pass while actively defending from Solov, trying to get back into a fight for a podium spot. Solov gets offline and by lap 8 has dropped heavily down the field, eventually taking some rough contact from Herta. Gabriele Mini has been making huge moves up the pack, up 10 places at this stage. Kamara and Stenchon have been in a pitched battle for several laps now, both having spent some time ahead of the other, but neither having been able to break the 1-second gap and shake the DRS of the driver behind. On lap 12, Mini passes Dunn with a wild amount of pace. He's up 15 spots at this point. The two Primers of Montoya and Boyer have a few wheel-to-wheel moments, which I'm sure had the Primer pit wall fully clenched after the F3 incident a little over an hour earlier. Villagomez and Solov both take trips off the track, Solov not having been able to fully recover from his earlier incidents. By lap 15, Muddy Boyer finds himself in the wall again, bringing out a safety car. Everyone from P15 down pits for a fresh set of super softs: Herta, Villagomez, Solov, Shields, Goethe, Varone, and Bogdanovic. Leon passes Intrapuvizak for second. When Kamara tries to make the same move for a podium spot, he fails to pass, drops below Stenchon, Mini, Miata, and eventually falling 7 places out of the points. Miata had some more in the tank and manages to pass Mini, who must have worn his tyres to nubs at this point. We finish with a podium of Dunn from 9th to 3rd, Leon from 7th to 2nd, and Dirksen from 2nd to 1st. This was such an eventful race, and I was so stressed watching this one. Our tyre allocation for this feature race was the softs and the super softs. The only drivers starting on the alternative strategy with the softs are Varone and Shields. Everyone else opted to start on the super softs. Before the race kicked off, there was an unsafe release noted from Primer for sending Sebastian Montoya directly into Roman Belinsky as they exited the pit lane prior to lining up on the grid. When the lights did go out, Stenchon and Dunn made a solid start off the line, but sadly Bogdanovic dropped to 5th. Dirksen also had some start issues, eventually getting a 5-second penalty for moving before the signal. Shortly afterwards, he ends up in the grass, dropping further down the order. Leon and Goethe make contact, with Leon copping some front wing damage, which Campos opted to replace during his tyre change later in the race. The two rodents of Dunn and Stenchon have some wheel-to-wheel racing, which comes to a point by lap 3, where Dunn makes the pass and tries to move over and cover off Stenchon, but does so too early, dunking his right rear into Stenchon's front wing, sending them both off the track. Dunn had some strong words to say, which he's already apologised for. I don't necessarily think these kinds of messages should be played on the broadcast. These young drivers are trying so hard to prove their mettle to top-tier teams. There's a lot of adrenaline, emotions are high, and they only have their own perspective on the situation. For feeder series, I think it's better to keep any hot-headed, inflammatory messages as private team-only comms. The post-race outcome for this incident is that Dunn is getting a 5-place grid penalty to be applied to the next feature race. Anyway, in the wake of the rodent fight, Solov inherited the lead as the safety car comes out, followed by Kamara and Bogdanovic. We're back racing again by lap 5. No pitting is allowed before lap 6, so no one could make use of the safety car for the mandatory tyre change. Miata and Mini had been making good passes. By lap 7, Miata was up 6 places and Mini up 7 places. Our first batch of pitters come in by the end of lap 7. Belinsky drives over a wheel gun left out by MP on the way out of the pit box, which they're investigated for. I don't know that the team's investigation outcomes are made public, but I can imagine there's some sort of fine issued for unsafe pit lane procedures. Montoya ends up with a 5-second penalty for speeding in the pit lane. At the end of lap 8, Bogdanovic pits before Solov and Kamara, giving him an extra lap to try and warm up his new soft tyres. By lap 9, Solov and Kamara join the last batch of the super soft tyre pitters and get out well ahead of Bogdanovic, who has to pass Goethe and Van Hoopen to get back into the fight. By lap 10, he's back on the tail of Kamara. Miney stalled in the pit lane after his tyre change, and the ART team restart his car to get him going again. By lap 14, Bogdanovic passes Kamara, who hadn't been making any headway to close the gap to the lead. Further back, there's a pack fighting for positions. Herta passes Miata, with Dirksen and Mini close behind them. Lap 16 is where it all falls apart for Bogdanovic. He ends up with a technical retirement and parks on the grass. We'll add this to the season's tally. Initially, a virtual safety car is called, which in F2 does not allow for pit stops to be made. However, this doesn't last long, and by lap 19 the safety car is called. Both Shields and Varone pit for their super softs. There are 14 laps to go, which is a long stint on the softer compound. Varone has a rough pit stop, but was so far ahead of the safety car at this point, it doesn't matter for him. He exits the pits ahead of the safety car, who, realizing he hadn't captured the race leader, had to wave the rest of the pack past, so they can catch up to Varone as the new lead of the race, further delaying the return to race restart. Coming from having watched more grassroots racing from a young age, I find a lot of the safety car rules and regulations a bit ridiculous. At best, these situations get an eye roll from me. At worst, I'm shouting at my TV about how counting down laps when no one is actually able to race is genuinely pointless. Anyway, I'll stop my rant there. Considering Varone started at P19, inheriting the race lead is a huge gain. To be clear, he had made it up to 12th on merit, against drivers on a softer compound tyre no less. Sadly, he's noted for speeding in the pit lane, earning a 5-second penalty, which was so unnecessary considering how far ahead he was at this point. By lap 22, we're at race speed again, and Solov pretty much immediately takes the lead off Varone. Van Hoopen has managed to pass Goethe and settle in 4th. Lap 27, Kamara gets past Varone, and the next lap Van Hoopen makes a close attempt, but eventually seals the pass on lap 29, getting into a podium place. No mean feat for a Trident. At this point, Varone's tyres are past their best, and he drops down further. Both high-techs of Miata and Herta continue to climb the field, as does Montoya, which is needed with a 5-second penalty over his head. Solov crosses the line in first, having started in 5th, Kamara finishes in 2nd from 6th, and Van Hoopen 3rd from 11th, earning Trident's first podium since 2024, and several times more points than they had in all of 2025. A lot of passes for our first round, with Muddy Boy up 9 places purely in the feature race, Montoya and Van Hoopen both up 12, and Miata up 16. This stat, however, was utterly dominated by Gabriele Mini, who stormed through the field in both races for a total of 28 passes. You do have to wonder how Mini's weekend would have gone, if not for the technical retirement and qualifying. Our other technical retirement was for another strong performer, Dino Beganovic, who was easily in line for at least a 2nd place finish otherwise. This is why F2 results are basically meaningless. Our top 3 for the championship currently sit as per the feature race podium, Van Hoopen in 3rd, Kamara in 2nd, and Solov in 1st. The next event for both series was due to be at Bahrain in April, which I had plans to attend in person. At this stage, it seems unlikely to happen with the state of the world as it is. If Saudi Arabia goes ahead, my next video will be a recap of the F2 race weekend sometime in May. Otherwise, I'll see you guys again in June for a Monaco recap. I'm hoping the FIA can squeeze in replacement events for any cancelled race weekends, but I don't know the likelihood of that. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you folks again next time. Also, yes, this is a sock on my microphone. Coming from... By lap 20...